Apart from us, it consisted of normal couples having normal pregnancies. The teacher appeared to be the sort of person who would never herself do anything as messy as giving birth. She spoke with that false brightness some people reserve for addressing the very old and the very young. The word woman was not in her vocabulary. It was always lady, as in, a lady may notice a blood-stained mucus discharge at the start of labor, or she would say, "You ladies will have your pubic hair shaved when you are admitted to the hospital." During every class, I considered approaching her politely to suggest that she try out the word woman, maybe just once or twice, but I never gathered the requisite courage. I still had sporadic bleeding. My nerves were shot, and I had become wildly superstitious, so I was convinced that the entire placenta would shear right off my uterine wall if I upset this teacher with my radical feminist demands. I did raise my hand in class to ask a couple of questions, actually the same question in two ways. How do you know when you are going into labor? And what do contractions feel like when they first begin? To each inquiry, the teacher responded, "Some ladies say it feels like menstrual cramps." I paid careful attention to her answer because I had been told that a C-section before labor might be necessary to save my baby's life and my own. Up until the time my pregnancy became prefixed by the word complicated, I assumed my adult life would go as I planned, that nothing really bad would ever happen to me. Intellectually, I knew this wasn't so because bad things happen to everyone, and indeed some bad things had already happened to me. But I secretly believed that I could surely get pregnancy right if only I put my mind to it. Pregnancy and childbirth can be either heartbreaking or exhilarating. The same is true of the process of adoption. Whether these journeys go smoothly or not, there's no other experience in our lives, apart from our own birth and death, that puts us through such massive change in such a brief amount of time. When things go by the book, which they're likely to do, pregnancy is still a lesson in surrender and vulnerability. Your body is inhabited, childbirth is a wild card, and you know your life will be altered in ways you can't even begin to imagine. No matter how well you prepare yourself, you're not going to be able to run the show. Change is the only thing you can count on for sure. With so much fear about the pregnancy itself, I had almost forgotten that the end result might be a baby. But on June 5th, 1975, I woke up in the middle of the night and noted to my amazement that I was having menstrual cramps. I racked my brain to figure out how, for God's sake, I could possibly be having menstrual cramps when I couldn't even remember having my last period. But I figured everything was going wrong anyway. Here was just one more bit of weirdness from my totally untrustworthy body. I considered searching for the Midol, but then I remembered that pregnant ladies don't take drugs. So I lay in bed, thinking that surely the cramps would go away, since it was inappropriate for them to be there to begin with. In the jargon of my profession, this thinking is called denial, which is not just a river in Egypt. My due date was in August, and going into labor in June was unthinkable. So I fell back asleep with my menstrual cramps, only to be wakened minutes later by something gushing out of me that I took to be blood. And this meant I'd be dead in a matter of minutes, since there was no way to get to the hospital fast enough to save my life. I pounded Steve awake, and he flew out of bed to switch on the light. We saw, to our most incredible relief, that whatever poured out of me was definitely not blood because it was colorless. While we were examining the wet sheet, I mentioned to Steve that I was having menstrual cramps, of all things. He suggested instead that I was in labor, that my water had broken, and yes, it was early, but it was happening, and that's why the bed was soaked. I refused to accept this reality because it wasn't time. Obviously, the baby had kicked my bladder and knocked all the pee out of me because I had recently heard of this very thing happening to some extremely pregnant person while she was grocery shopping. So I put my nose to the wet sheet and insisted that Steve get down and sniff it with me. I was quite positive that I detected a urine-like odor. Carol Burnett says that comedy is tragedy plus time. If I had been a fly on the wall, I would have observed a scene of great hilarity. The two of us crouched like dogs on our bed, noses to the sheet, coming up for air, only long enough to fight with each other about whether we were or were not smelling pee. We called the doctor, who said he'd meet us at the hospital right away. Standing under the moon outside the hospital door, all fear left me. In its place, I felt the most ineffable sadness I've ever known. I turned to Steve and said, "I'm so sorry." He hugged me and said that he loved me and that nothing was my fault, but I knew it was. I knew I had just committed the biggest screw-up in the world. The stakes had never been so high, and I couldn't even get pregnancy right. Labor is a well-named, all-consuming experience. When I was told that I could go ahead with natural childbirth, I put my emotions aside like an athlete competing in a major event. My doctor said that a helicopter would be available to fly the baby to the intensive care unit at the medical center in Kansas City if need be. Everyone was predicting a tiny, premature infant of, say, 4 pounds. I imagined one even smaller because, as I lay on my back and looked down, I didn't even look pregnant anymore. There was nothing I could do but have this baby. I was taken over by the pure physicality of the event, and now everything went by the book. Soon I was being wheeled from a small, dark room into a large room flooded with sunlight. I remember my body pushing for me, how struck I was with the mammalian nature of it all, and then out slid the most beautiful baby you could ever imagine seeing in your entire life, the most beautiful big baby. I didn't trust my eyes. It occurred to me that maybe he was only the size of a hamster, but that in my psychotic denial, I was blowing him up into a normal-sized baby. So I held my breath and waited for someone else to speak. And then my doctor said, "He's big." And someone else said, "Well, look at this perfect baby boy." Steve was beside himself with joy, and if I have ever in my life known total happiness, it was then. Matthew Reuben Lerner was 20 inches long and weighed 7 pounds 4 ounces. He showed some signs of prematurity, but he was not nearly as early as we all had calculated. Then he was taken away, and the next thing I heard was that he scored 9 out of 10 on his APGAR test. I didn't know what this meant, but figuring that it was like getting an A- on his first exam, I was filled with pride that he was already distinguishing himself in some academic sense while still leaving room for improvement. My first pregnancy taught me the basics about motherhood. I learned that we're not in control of what happens to our children, that this fact needn't stop us from feeling totally guilty and responsible, that matters of life and death turn on a dime, that most of what we worry about doesn't